Hello, and welcome to the ThinkJSOU webinar series, brought to you by the Office for Strategic Engagement. Today, we are pleased to present a distinguished speaker. This session is unclassified and will be recorded and posted to the JSOU network. Please keep in mind that the views and opinions expressed by all participants do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policy of the U.S. Government, Department of Defense, or USSOCOM. If you have questions after this session, please email thinkjsou@jsou.edu.
Thank you for joining us for a special discussion on SOFT's role in the digital domain. I'm Dr. Mark Grzegorzewski, and today I'll be interviewing one of the authors of Special Operations Forces and Cyber-Enabled Influence Operations, Dr. Herb Lin of Stanford, where he serves as Senior Research Scholar at the Center for International Security and Cooperation and the Hoover Institution, where he is the Hank J. Holland Fellow in Cyber Policy and Security. While Dr. Lin received his doctorate in physics from MIT, his current research interests relate broadly to policy-related dimensions of cybersecurity and cyberspace, and he is particularly interested in the use of offensive operations in cyberspace as instruments of national policy and in the security dimensions of information warfare and influence operations on national security. Apart from his work on cyberspace and cybersecurity, he's published in cognitive science, science education, biophysics, and arms control and defense policy. Thank you for taking the time for us today, and if we may, let's jump right into it. After recently reading your chapter in Strategic Latency Unleashed, I knew I had to speak with you and get you to expand upon your thoughts. For those of you who don't know about Dr. Lin's chapter, it was co-written by a member of our community, Tricia Wyman. And we'll make sure to put a link in the video for those who want to read their chapter or the entire book. Herb, can you tell us a little bit about your chapter and why it's of interest to the special operations community?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. I'm delighted to be here. I got to say that understanding the role of the Special Forces community and its relationship to cyber has been really a fascinating thing for me. It was originally motivated by the idea that I thought that the cyber people should be able to learn a lot from the way in which the special forces operate, and their philosophy of operation and so on. And that's what inspired me to look at this space. The basic point is that, especially with the special forces, mostly the special forces don't engage in direct combat, as far as I can tell. Mostly they're involved. I mean, when they do, they're extraordinarily deadly and so on. But mostly what they do is they shape environments. A large part of their operation is talking to people and influencing people and trying to get people to understand our perspective and so on. And it's all in the shape. The best word that that you guys use on this is shape, to shape the environment to create favorable conditions for the United States, and that is basically that's influence. If you want to think about cyber-enabled influence, that's a whole new domain where the special forces can operate. And in particular, also where they have the long-standing expertise to do it. PSYOP soldiers come largely, certainly active duty, come from the special forces community. And what has been striking to me about the Department of Defense is that most of its efforts to date, not all, but most of its efforts to date, when it thinks about cyberspace, have been devoted to hacking of computers and how to prevent it, how to do it, and so on. Psychological operations are basically about hacking human minds, for good, for honorable and good purposes when we do it, for dastardly purposes when they do it, when the bad guys do it. But we're in an environment where cyberspace is the medium in which all this stuff can happen. And what I wanted to do what Trish and I wanted to do in the chapter is underscore the importance of the cyber-enabled side of that for the future of software.
Great, thank you. In the chapter, you and Tricia talk a lot about the system 1 and system 2 thinking. And I wanted to ask, how does nurturing system 2 thinking attributes in SOF impact the interplay between the information environment and information systems?
Well, okay, so system 1 and system 2 thinking have to do with the fact that everybody, you, me, guy in the street, everybody has two modes of thinking. One is a kind of reflexive mode of operating that's evolutionarily very old. It's the one that reacts quickly, is alert to, highly alert to danger, and so on and so forth. And then there's another mode of thinking, what we call system 2, which is more rational. It's more deliberate. It's slower, considerably slower. It has to be invoked consciously. System 1 of thinking is always active. The clever information operator, the influence operator in this business, knows how to exploit system 1 and system 2 thinking. And so when I will interpret your sense of nurturing system 1 and system 2 as, what I want to do, if I'm an influencer and I want to influence another party, it is often, not always, but often easier if you start with trying to invoke system 1 in the way they think. That is, you want to appeal to their emotions. You want to create a jolt. You want to create an immediate sense of heightened awareness and so on. All of these things that you want to be able to do in the other guy, and be aware that your adversary is also, if he's clever, is also trying to do the same thing to you and to your friendlies. We have all seen those headlines in newspapers that say so and so said this outrageous thing and so on, and we're amazed that anybody would believe it. But that message has been crafted in such a way to appeal to certain fears, to certain emotions, pre-existing beliefs and so on, that give the other guy a head start on us. Whereas if we go in there and just try to give them the logical argument for why we're right and so on, that just falls flat on its face. My understanding of soft people is that they understand this intuitively. They know this. They know about the value of building trust and so on. And they know it doesn't start with a PowerPoint presentation, outlining the 6 points why, why should they align with us, and so on. I mean, that's what you give the politicians in Washington. It's not what you give the people in the field. So understanding that difference and knowing when and where to use system 1 thinking, to exploit system 1 thinking in the adversary, and to be aware of it when it's being used against you. Those are very important skills for soft to have, again, when they're deployed on the ground.
And that's a fantastic answer, and we're gonna pull apart some of those comments here in a moment. I always like to think about the risk of not acting. So I really enjoyed your chapter, but I wanted to ask, what's the risk of not acting? Perhaps what's the risk of the soft community not creating a more all-around soldier that's educated in things like social and cognitive psychology, marketing, social media, and, as you call it, the arts of influence and persuasion?
Well, I mean, look, I hesitate to answer that because all the soft people that I know are extraordinarily capable, and they will take tools from wherever they can, and so I don't worry about that in some sense. But that said, if you ignore the quote soft stuff, perception, psychology, sociology, and so on, you're going to get screwed. How many times have operators gone into a situation in the field and they didn't know that there were these two groups that had hated each other? Okay, and they try to call a meeting to get them to work together and so on. I mean, if you call a meeting between two groups that hate each other and you don't know that, okay, that's bad news. Okay, every person knows that intuitively, but what they may not realize is that the difference between the fact that these two groups are opposing means that they will often see the same situation differently. So there's a very famous experiment done in the early 50s, where people watch there was a film of I think it was a Dartmouth-Princeton football game. And they showed it to Dartmouth people, fans, and they showed it to Princeton fans. And uniformly, Princeton fans caught more errors that favored Dartmouth, and Dartmouth caught more errors that favored Princeton in the umpiring, in the reffing. I mean, they saw the same game. Okay, how can this be? Well, you so intuitively you understand. What the Dartmouth people said, no, that wasn't the cheap hit. That was he just made a small mistake and it wasn't a big deal. When it was my running back that did it. But when the other guy did more or less the same thing, that was really bad, right? And the point is that if you go into a situation where you don't know that these kinds of things are operating, these kinds of perceptual factors are operating, you're going to be in big trouble. Because yes, you bring them together, that they oppose each other, that they hate each other. But what you may go into it thinking, no, it's the same data. We're seeing the same thing. Why don't you see? No, it doesn't work like that. And you have to be able to take that into account. You at least have to be aware of it. Part of the problem in dealing with this thing and remediating it is that these things are hardwired into the human brain. And so, like if I have a problem on my computer and it screws up somewhere, I can download a patch. Okay, I can download the software. I can't do that for the human brain. Okay, I can't. There's no way of fixing this in the human brain, except by through a long, slow process of adjusting perceptions and so on. I mean, that's what education is all about. But of course, as you know, education is a long-term issue.
That's a great example, and I think it really speaks to us who are sports fans. In the response there, you kind of spoke about the hardware and the software in a way. And in the article, the chapter, you also kind of speak about that as well. So I was hoping you could answer, can you speak to how cyber operations, which are highly technical, can be amplified by cyber-enabled influence operations, which are influenced more by the soft sciences?
Well, okay, so sure. You might conduct, everybody has limited resources. They can only conduct so many operations, in a given time. You would want to go after high-value targets in conducting a cyber operation. Screw up their computer somehow, somehow compromise their computer. So I asked the question, what makes a person high value? What makes a target high value? There's not a sign on their computer that says this is a high value target. So you have to know something about the person. Okay, you have to know something about who that person talks to, who that person is likely to influence, who influences that person, and so on. It's a deliberate, deciding who constitutes a high value target. That's just that. If you're talking about an individual, that's fundamentally a psychological and sociological process. it's not a, there's no technical analysis that will give that will give that to you. Technical in the sense of counting of rifles or something like that, or at least the technical analysis is only part of it, right? You have to take into account, whether or not this person, he commands a bunch of people with lots of rifles and many people, but maybe they don't respect it, or maybe they do respect him and all they have is slingshots, and if they all respect him, will do whatever he says, that and carry it out to the death. Maybe that's worse for you than a bunch of guys with rifles who don't really give a shit.
So going off of that, and I really agree with that response. You have to know the details of your target. How does if we have a more cognitively versatile soft, how does that work when your targets are in walled off places, in walled off information spaces like China and Russia? And as an add-on to that, if soft is more cognitively versatile, are we able to see gaps and seams that those on the more technical side might miss?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the things, I give this example in the in the chapter. I mean, one of the great things about SOC is that they know how to blend in with the local environment, right? They make friends with. I mean, it's not buddy friends, but they understand the value of developing personal relationships with people and so on. Okay? And so they SOF deploys to Afghanistan, and they don't go in there in their in their dress uniforms. They wear beard. They don't shave, and they ride horses to and so on. I mean, they do the same things. So they become they adopt the local customs. Well, doing this in China, when there's such a small fraction of the SOF are Asian, okay, that's blending in ain't easy, right? You can't send what's a large SOF fellow among small Chinese people is going to stand out, right? And will naturally generate some suspicion. Well, if you're in cyberspace, if you're operating in cyberspace, nobody can tell who you are. Your ethnicity isn't apparent in cyberspace. You can pretend to be anybody. Okay. And of course, it's much easier. It's you can teach somebody to speak Chinese, and you can give them a local introduction to the culture, and so on. You can't change a person's height. And so I would argue that in certain walled off places, where it's of course much easier to wall off a place against physical intrusion than it is against information intrusion, right? Soft people have to me, have an interesting role, which I would love to explore at some point with somebody, about operating as sort of clandestine is the right word, secret, covert. Not covert is not the right word either. Anyway, sort of quiet operators in traditionally denied territories, operating in cyberspace in the various kinds of venues that they have. For example, gaming environments or what have you. Nobody knows that who's behind a certain avatar, and it could be a soft guy. And such a person is in a position to influence in ways that normally they wouldn't have access to that. So that's one example of where I think cyberspace gives SOF some new opportunities that they didn't have before.
Sure. And again, I find myself in complete agreement. I've been writing on how SOF can use a digital presence, in unconventional warfare, and not show their face, as you were talking about. A lot easier to blend in. And I know historically SOF don't have that problem. During World War II, it's really easy to blend in Eastern Europe, but during the Korean War and Vietnam War, a lot harder to blend in.
Right.
So Can you talk about a little bit about what SOF can do to build mental resiliency against adversary cyber-enabled information operations?
Well, that's an interesting question. I, I I didn't talk about that in the chapter, but so these answers that I'm going to give you are more off the cuff. So be warned. Okay, you've been warned. The soft guys and are there women in soft, by the way? I think so.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Soft people are extraordinarily disciplined, and more so that that's partly what separates them from the regular line forces. And so one goes into this thinking that they probably have inherent advantages. They know how to control their emotions and so on and so forth. Okay, better than the average soldier. I can believe that. On the other hand, I mean, you may remember some time ago, a couple of years, 3 or 4 years ago, or something, there was the Fitbit scandal, where people were wearing their Fitbits, and they were running around, on their exercise tracks, and lo and behold, in these completely dark areas of the world, there were these little ovals around certain areas that just appeared. Nobody knew what the hell was going on there. And it turned out that the Fitbits were uploading data on GPS data on people running in certain, staying fit in certain areas. Nobody knew where they were, right? And you got to, some of those have to be special force people. Okay, maybe not ours, but they're black ops people that for some reason have been persuaded to wear a GPS tracker on them, right? And to broadcast it to the internet. Now, they didn't realize that, but it's the sort of thing where there's a lot of ways of information leaking out, and even very sophisticated people can get compromised. They don't know. They don't think through, and they can't think through all of the possible ways of which in which somebody might be able to get at them. They're of course very good at finding those ways to get at somebody else, but doing that in reverse, that's mighty hard, because you've got to do it. You've got to do it systematically. You've got to do it for all possible threats, and that's really hard, right? It's easy to do it for one person. And, if you're trying to go after one person, I can probably come up with an attack that will work. And the first attack doesn't work, the second attack will, and so on. But when it's trying to defend, for when I'm trying to defend against this stuff, I got to defend against everything. Just one loss on my part gives away the game.
Yeah. Great response, and I would add to that, thankfully that our adversaries also make similar mistakes, like the Fitbit example that you provided. So thankfully, It's not just us.
That's right. It's not just the U.S. That's correct. That's correct.
So, and you did not say this in your chapter, but this is a question that got me thinking. Is there something to taking offensive cyber operators and getting them outside their comfort zone, meaning mostly the technical, and having them focus it on, or at least exposed to the soft sciences like culture, psychology, mass communications?
Well, so I have another paper that was published, I can't remember, before or after this, around the same time, which advocated that Cyber Command and Special Operations Command ought to engage in a formal partnership where Cyber Command was worried about the information delivery side of it, and SOCOM was worried about the information content side of it. That is, Cyber Command as an organization, its DNA is built in hacking computers, in getting to somebody's computer, pulling messages out, corrupting it. Okay, how do you want to corrupt it? What information do you want to put in to the other guy's system that will mess them up? What do computer hackers know about psychology? Okay, I mean, some of them know a lot, but they're not specialists. They're not particularly hired for that. They're particularly hired for their ability to understand what's going on deep in the bowels of an operating system. Okay. So I want to see eventually a standing unit. The model that I propose is a standing joint task force, but I don't care about the mechanism. Where the cyber guys and the psychological ops guys are working together as a team, as equals, not one subordinate to the other. And I continue to believe that that's the right model. Now, my friends in Cyber Command say, yeah, that's happening, and that may even be true. I don't know that, but I do know that there is a long tradition in the United States of denigrating psychological operations, and unfortunately, I think that's our ability to engage in this space. When people talk about psychological operations, oh, those lying, cheating bastards. Right? I mean, that's what my people, the people that I know, who are PsyOps officers, say that's the way the rest of the Pentagon sees them. They're necessary evil. So,
yeah, and they've been viewed that way throughout history.
Right.
And SOF has been viewed that way as well. We always got the malcontents and the troublemakers, and that's kind of what made early SOF. And the people who want to hack things and question things, they became really good cyber operators. Right. And there's something to be said for maybe Cybercom and SOCOM should have been one joint organization as opposed to two different. I've seen people make that argument as well. So I want to ask, the defensive side is always left out, and you can argue, and I do argue, that there should not really be an offense defense split. They should be informing each other. But I want to ask, going against what I just said, thinking defensively, how might those charged with protecting our networks benefit from a soft science education? Knowing how China views the world and how China views cyberspace, or how Russia views the world and how Russia views cyberspace, can that inform the decisions that they make in cyberspace and defensively?
I'll tell you a story. It is well known among hackers that the best way to do social engineering on an organization, if you want to get into their computer system, is to call up the help desk at 3 a.m. and be female. Why is this the case? Well, the people who work the help desk get their preference of the time shift, the time shift on the basis of seniority. And, and sort of the more senior the person, usually the better they are. So you're getting the least experienced people, the least technically sophisticated people on the help desk at 3 a.m. Why female? Because these guys are almost always male. And you'd be amazed at what a lonely guy at 3 a.m. sitting by himself on a help, in a call center will do to a semi-seductive female voice that sounds very pleasant and sort of does a little bit of flirting with him on the phone. You'll be amazed at what that person can get out of it. There was the best example of this was, I can't remember the person's name, but there was this fake LinkedIn profile some years ago by a person who used a semi-pornographic image on her LinkedIn profile and made up a whole bunch of just complete bullshit that was about her professional credentials, some of which was internally contradictory. And she was swamped with requests to connect from lots of men who invited her to speak at conferences and to review papers and and so on and so forth. And just totally overwhelmed. It turned out that this 27-year-old woman, attractive woman, was actually a 50-year-old man who just wanted to see whether or not he could do this. It was a remarkable, so it's the same kind of psychology. Okay. Defensively, you got to be aware of that kind of phenomenon. I mean, it starts with awareness. Now, since it takes advantage, of course, of phenomenon that, like seniority and who gets the right, it disrupts cultures. But still, it's this is the sort of thing where you have to pay attention to the kind of environment that you're working in, and just take that stuff into account.
Mhm. Well, Dr. Lin, I'd like to thank you for your time today. This has not only been an interesting conversation, it's been an entertaining conversation. It's been an excellent conversation.
Okay.
I loved all the examples that you provided to us. And for our audience, I want to let you know, if you enjoyed this discussion, I highly recommend you reading the entirety of this chapter, Special Operations Forces and Cyber-Enabled Influence Operations, published by the Center for Global Security Research back in January 2021. I'd like to thank our audience, and I'll see you next time for another ThinkJSOU discussion. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.